The sun was merciless that day. It poured fire upon the streets of Ouagadougou, painting the air in gold and dust. Every rooftop trembled with drumbeats. Every alley hummed with songs of hope and freedom. Thousands lined the road, men, women, children, a sea of faces shining with sweat, faith, and exhaustion. They were not just waiting for a man, they were waiting for a sign. Then, silence cracked. The crowd's roar deepened into a single thunderous chant. Vive Traoré! Vive Burkina Faso! From the far end of the boulevard, the convoy appeared. Black military trucks moved like shadows under the blazing sun. Flags waved from windows. Soldiers stood firm, scanning rooftops. And at the center of it all, seated upright in a dusty green vehicle, was Ibrahim Traoré, the young captain who had risen from the ashes of despair to become a symbol of unshakable hope. He wasn't smiling. He never did during parades. His eyes, calm and sharp, scanned the faces, not as a ruler looking down, but as a soldier looking for his people. But that day, something was different. The people weren't cheering for power. They were cheering for survival. For the first time, the streets of Ouagadougou felt alive with a truth no foreign hand could rewrite. And then, amid the dust, drums and deafening chants, something made the entire convoy slow down. A single image cut through the chaos, like light through smoke. A little girl, no, more than 7 years old, barefoot, dust clinging to her tiny legs, her dress torn at the seams, yet in her hands, trembling, fragile but defiant. She held a flag, not a toy-sized flag, but a massive one, a flag almost as tall as she was, its red, green, and gold fabric trailing across the hot dirt behind her. She could barely hold it up, but she refused to let it fall. Her name was Amina, and though no one around her knew it yet, her small act would become a story told in every classroom, every market, every heart that still believed in the power of hope. The crowd roared around her, bodies pressed so tight she could barely breathe. Adults screamed, waved, reached for the convoy. But Amina's world had narrowed to one thing, that flag. The same flag her late father used to hang over their doorway before. The war took him away. Every gust of wind threatened to knock her down. Her little arms burned, but she gritted her teeth and whispered to herself, "Don't let go. Don't let it touch the ground." The convoy crawled closer. Motorcycles roared. Boots hit asphalt. Dust filled the air. Amina lifted the flag one last time, higher than her head, the pole shaking in her hands. The sun flashed across the green and red fabric, a burst of color in a world of brown and gold. And then, he saw her. Across the blur of motion and noise, Ibrahim Traoré's eyes locked on hers. For a moment, time stopped. No sound. No drums. Just a silence so heavy it made hearts pound louder than gunfire. He saw the exhaustion on her face, the resolve in her trembling arms. He saw not a child, but a message. His hand rose. The convoy slowed. Then stopped. The soldiers exchanged glances. The crowd gasped. The president's car, in the middle of the capital's largest parade, had come to a complete halt. A hush fell over thousands. Only the flag moved now, swaying gently in Amina's weak hands, and in that single instant, the story of Burkina Faso, its pain, its struggle, its faith, was alive in one child's grip. Amina blinked, dust stinging her eyes. She couldn't believe it. The man on every mural, every poster, the man they called the Lion of the Sahel, was looking directly at her. Their eyes met, and she didn't see power. She saw kindness. Quiet. Heavy, human. Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. "Vive, Traore." The whisper was almost lost in the wind. But he heard it. Somehow he did. Ibrahim opened his door. A soldier tried to stop him. "Sir, it's not safe." But the captain's gaze silenced him. He stepped out, boots on the ground, dust rising like mist around him. And as he walked toward her, the crowd parted, slowly, reverently, as though they were watching something sacred unfold. Amina stood frozen. The flag slipped in her hand. He reached her. For a heartbeat, the world was silent again. Then with one hand, he steadied the pole and helped her lift it higher. His other hand rested gently on her shoulder, and when he spoke, His voice carried through the silence like thunder after rain. Burkina Faso stands because of hearts like yours. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time the crowd didn't cheer. They simply watched, in awe, in reverence, in silence, because they all understood what had just happened. This was not a parade anymore. This was a promise between a soldier and a child, between a leader and his people. But no one knew that within hours of that moment, that same flag would return, bloodstained, torn, carrying a message that would change the nation forever. The moment Ibrahim Traoré stepped from the vehicle, the city seemed to hold its breath. Every sound dissolved. Even the drums dared not speak. The sun itself dimmed behind a veil of dust, as if the heavens leaned closer to watch. He walked forward slowly, his boots sinking into the soft earth. Every step echoed, deliberate, heavy, eternal. His soldiers tensed, scanning the rooftops. The air was alive with tension. Foreign journalists lifted their cameras, whispering, "He's risking everything for this scene." But Ibrahim wasn't performing. He was remembering. Each stride toward that little girl pulled him deeper into his own past. A dusty village, a broken flag on a cracked wall, a mother who used to whisper, "Never let go of who you are, no matter how heavy it feels." And now, before him, stood that same lesson, alive in the trembling hands of a 7-year-old child. Amina's knees shook. Her vision blurred with heat and tears. She could barely breathe. The flagpole cut into her palms. Still, she didn't let go. The soldiers whispered into radios. The commander muttered, "Sir, please, we have to move." But Ibrahim lifted his hand, the same hand that had once commanded a revolution, and the whole street froze again. He stopped in front of Amina, the dust swirling around them like golden smoke. She was so small, the flag so enormous that it seemed to swallow her whole. And then, his voice, deep, calm, almost fatherly, broke the silence. "Do not let go. Little sister." The crowd gasped. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. A softness that didn't belong to power, but to pain. "The flag is heavy," he continued, kneeling down until his eyes met hers. "But so is the future. And you are already carrying it." The words rippled through the crowd like wind over fire. Tears began to fall, quietly, shamefully, from faces that had forgotten how to feel hope. Amina couldn't speak. Her throat burned. She had never been called sister by anyone of power before. Her lips trembled. It's heavy, sir," she whispered. Traore smiled faintly, a weary smile, like a man who had seen too much darkness to ever laugh fully again. He reached out and touched the flagpole, just beneath her tiny hands. He didn't take it away, he simply held it with her. The metal was hot from the sun. Together, they lifted, and for the first time the fabric didn't drag in the dirt. It rose, majestic, full, alive, a wave of red, green, and gold bursting against the sky. The people erupted, not in shouts, but in sobs. Some dropped to their knees. Others covered their faces as if afraid of their own emotions. Even the soldiers looked away, pretending not to blink back tears, and at the center of it all, the young soldier-turned-leader and the barefoot child held the same flag high. The world watched from the barricades. The foreign cameras zoomed in. "Look at him," one journalist muttered, "pretending to be the savior. Give it a few months. He'll be like the rest." But another cameraman, older, silent, lowered his lens. He whispered to himself, "No, that man's heart is bleeding on that street." Across the city, millions watched live broadcasts. Mothers in tiny homes pressed their hands to their mouths. Fathers who had lost everything to war whispered, "Maybe. Just maybe." Meanwhile, Ibrahim's security chief, Captain Sankara, stood frozen, sweat beading under his cap. He leaned toward his earpiece. "Command, we're exposed. I repeat, the president is in the open." But before he could finish, Ibrahim's voice stopped him. "If danger finds me among my people," he said without turning his head, "then it means I'm standing exactly where I belong." Sankara's jaw tightened. He'd followed Ibrahim since the rebellion, through gunfire, through betrayal, And yet this moment terrified him more than any battle, not because of the threat of violence, but because of what compassion could cost a leader. The weight-shared Amina stared at him. Her tears turned to quiet sobs, her chest shaking as if releasing years of silence. "Why me?" she finally whispered. "Why stop for me?" Traore's voice softened, a note of sadness beneath the strength. "Because when I see you, I see all of us," he said. "I see every child who carries the weight of hunger, the silence of loss, the hope that the world forgot. And I see a future that refuses to bow." The words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded like prayer. Amina blinked through tears. "Will it ever get lighter?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked, and for a moment, he wasn't a president. He was a boy again, standing barefoot in red dust, watching his own mother carry water through the heat. "Yes," he said softly. "When we lift it together." The crowd's tears turned into a storm of emotion. Some began to sing, low at first, then louder, the old song of unity once banned by the colonizers. The melody rose and echoed through the streets like thunder after drought. "Our land, our blood, our pride, we rise, we rise." And the two of them, a child and a leader, stood side by side beneath the banner of that anthem, the flag flapping wildly above them like the heartbeat of a new dawn. But hope is never alone. In the shadows, behind the cheers, eyes watched coldly. Not everyone in Burkina Faso celebrated that moment. In the upper windows of a distant building, men in suits whispered into phones. "He's playing saint again," one hissed. "Let him enjoy his parade. Soon that same crowd will turn on him." Far away, in air-conditioned offices beyond the country's borders, others watched with thin smiles. "He's dangerous," said one foreign advisor. "A leader who makes people believe they matter is always dangerous." Their words hung like poison in the air. But on that street, Ibrahim Traoré didn't see enemies. He saw his people. The symbol born when he finally rose to his feet. He didn't take the flag from Amina. He handed it back to her. His voice strong again. "Keep it high, little sister. Let them see that our future does not kneel." Then, before the guards could stop him, he saluted her, a full military salute, the same gesture soldiers give to their commanders. The crowd erupted. It was no longer celebration, it was awakening. And that night, a photograph would spread across the world. The soldier who knelt before a child. But behind that photo lay something no camera could capture. The quiet promise between two souls who carried the same burden in different ways. The crowd had gone silent. The wind seemed to hold its breath. The sound of drums chanting. The endless roar of celebration. All of it faded into something sacred. Because what the people of Burkina Faso were witnessing now was not politics. It was a revelation. Ibrahim Traoré stood there, dust rising around his boots, sunlight glinting off his uniform, his hand resting gently on the same flag that little Amina had struggled to hold. The great flag of their land, tattered, heavy, stained by years of pain, now waved between them both. Two souls, one leader, one child, both carrying the same dream. And as Ibrahim knelt again, their eyes met. He smiled, not the practiced smile of a politician, but the quiet, human smile of a man who had once been that child. Poor, ignored, dreaming of a better tomorrow. "Do you see this flag, Amina?" he said softly, his voice carrying over the silent crowd. She nodded through her tears. Her small fingers gripped the wooden pole as if it were the last thing keeping her standing. "When you carry it alone," he continued, "it feels heavy, too heavy, but when we carry it together," he tightened his hand around the fabric, helping her lift it higher. "It is no longer a burden. It becomes strength." A murmur spread through the people. Mothers held their children closer. Old men who had seen too many broken promises felt something stir inside their chests again. "Hope," Amina's lips trembled. "But I am just a girl. I'm nobody." Traoré's eyes softened. He shook his head slowly. "No, my child. You are not nobody. You are Burkina Faso itself." He turned slightly, so the crowd could hear. "You are every child who has been forgotten. Every mother who has gone hungry. Every voice that was told to stay silent. You are the heart of this nation. His words rolled through, the air like thunder wrapped in sunlight. The people didn't just hear him. They felt him. Amina sobbed now, but her tears weren't born of pain. They were cleansing, washing away years of being unseen. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. Even the journalists, usually detached behind their lenses, lowered their cameras. They were no longer documenting history. They were part of it. One of them whispered, This is not a speech," another replied quietly. "No, this is the soul of a nation speaking." Ibrahim stood tall again, still holding the flag with her. He turned toward his security chief. "Captain Sankara, find her home," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "Find her grandmother. Make sure they have food, shelter, education, everything." Sankara's voice cracked slightly. "Yes, Captain." Right away. But Traore wasn't done. He looked back at the crowd, tens of thousands of eyes watching him, waiting for what came next. And then, with a deep breath, he spoke again, this time louder, stronger, like a wave crashing over every soul within reach. "This is not charity," he declared. "This is justice." The words struck like lightning. He raised the flag higher, the fabric catching the golden light of the afternoon sun. "This is what we fight for, not for the rich to get richer, not for our people to live as beggars in their own land, but for every child to know they are seen, for every Amina in this nation to walk with dignity, to dream without fear." A roar erupted, raw, powerful, stoppable. It wasn't just applause, it was a collective cry, a release of years of silence and struggle. Women ululated, soldiers pounded their chests, and even elders raised trembling fists toward the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a drum began to beat again, slow, steady, proud. Amina stood beside him, clutching the flag that now seemed to shimmer in the light. It wasn't torn anymore, not in her eyes. It was whole, because she believed again. She looked up at him and whispered, "Thank you, Captain." He smiled gently, the weight of the moment softening his strong features. "No, Amina, thank you. You reminded me what leadership truly means." Then, reaching into his jacket pocket, he took out a small golden pin, the national emblem of Burkina Faso. A star crossed by two spears. He knelt once more, pinning it to the front of her worn shirt. "Wear this," he said quietly. "And remember, you are not small. You are not invisible. You are the future of this nation. You are hope made flesh." Amina stared at it as if it were made of light itself. Her lips trembled, and she whispered, "I'll never let it fall." "Sir, never." As Traore stood, the crowd parted for him like a sea of reverence. People reached out, not to grab or take, but to bless. Hands stretched toward him in gratitude, in faith, and for the first time in a long while. The people of Burkina Faso didn't feel like subjects. They felt like citizens, like family. Hours later, the world would see what happened next. The footage spread across the globe like fire in dry grass. Every screen, every news feed, every phone carried that same image. A soldier president kneeling beside a barefoot child, lifting a flag together beneath the blazing African sun. In Paris, people watched and wept silently. In Lagos, crowds gathered in cafes, replaying the clip again and again. In Brazil, murals appeared overnight, painted with the image of the two figures beneath the flag. In Asia, in Europe, in forgotten villages and crowded cities, one truth echoed louder than borders. This is what real leadership looks like. Commentators spoke of politics, of symbolism, of power, but those who felt it understood it was something more. It was a reminder that leadership isn't about standing above people, it's about kneeling beside them. That power doesn't come from authority, it comes from compassion. Back in Ouagadougou, Traore's team found Amina's home, a crumbling clay house at the edge of the city. Her grandmother, Fanta, stood in the doorway, trembling when the presidential convoy arrived. She thought they had made a mistake, until she saw Amina step out, still clutching the flag, the pin glinting proudly on her shirt. Fanta covered her mouth and wept. "My child, what have you done?" Amina smiled through her tears. "I carried the flag, grandmother. And he saw me. The officials brought supplies, food, water, new clothes, and an envelope sealed with the national crest. Inside was a scholarship, a promise of education for Amina until university. Fanta fell to her knees, whispering prayers of thanks not to a man, but to the spirit of justice that had finally remembered them. Later that night, Ibrahim sat alone in his study. The city outside was still alive with singing, but his gaze was on the small photo now sitting on his desk, a still frame from that day. Him and Amina, hands joined by the flag. He exhaled deeply. "This," he murmured to himself, "is why we fight. Not for titles, not for power, but for moments like this." He looked toward the open window, where the sound of children's laughter drifted in from the street, and he smiled. The next morning, newspapers across the world carried the same headline: "The day a president kneels for his people." But in Burkina Faso, they called it something else. They called it the day the flag became light. Because since that day, the flag didn't just belong to the government. It belonged to every Amina, every Fanta, every person who dared to hope again. Sometimes the greatest acts of leadership are not written in speeches or carved in stone. Sometimes they are written in dust, in the trembling hands of a child, and in the heart of a man who remembered where he came from. Let this moment remind us all that true power is not in how high you stand, but in how deeply you kneel for the truth, if you believe the world needs more. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, leaders who lift others instead of themselves, then share this story. Let his light spread, because sometimes a single act of kindness can lift an entire nation. Within days of that unforgettable afternoon, a quiet miracle began to unfold across Burkina Faso. Amina and her grandmother, Fanta, were moved to a safer home, a modest house, but one that stood firm even when the rains came. The roof didn't leak anymore, the walls didn't crumble at night, and for the first time in her life, Amina slept without fear of waking to hunger. But what mattered more than the food, the shelter or the comfort, was the hope that maybe, just maybe, this world could care, that the unseen could be seen, that a flag, once too heavy for a child, could become a torch lighting an entire nation. Word of what happened spread faster than anyone imagined. Across villages and towns, people began to talk, not about the convoy or the cameras, but about the moment. A soldier president had knelt beside a barefoot child, and in doing so, he had reminded an entire country of what it meant to stand together. Neighbors began to look out for one another again. Strangers shared food, rebuilt broken walls, and checked on the children in their villages. Schools opened their doors to those who had been forgotten. Farmers shared seeds. Teachers taught without pay. The spirit of unity, once only a dream, had begun to live in the hearts of the people. Young men and women, inspired by Ibrahim Traoré's words, started movements of their own, building wells, cleaning streets, teaching literacy in places the government had never reached. They called it the Flag Movement, and its motto was simple: "Together, it's not too heavy." Of course, the enemies of hope did not rest. Foreign media houses, owned by those who profited from Burkina Faso's weakness, tried to twist the story. They called it a stunt, a political performance designed for sympathy. They published headlines dripping with skepticism, a calculated gesture, the president's publicity trick. But the people who were there knew better. They had seen it with their own eyes. The raw emotion, the silence that fell over the crowd, the trembling in Amina's hands, none of that could be scripted. And the world felt it too. Because truth, when it is real, needs no defense. The video became more than a story. It became a mirror. Everywhere it was watched, people began asking, when was the last time our leaders knelt for the people? When was the last time we saw power bow to love? Months passed, then years. Amina thrived in school. She was shy at first, always sitting in the back row, afraid her voice might break if she spoke too loudly. But every time she touched the small golden pin Ibrahim had placed on her shirt, she remembered his words: "You are not small. You are Burkina Faso." And with each passing day, she began to believe them. She spoke at schools, telling children her story. At first, her voice trembled. But little by little, it grew steadier, fuller, brighter. She told them how a leader saw her when no one else did. How that moment didn't just change her life, it changed her belief in life itself. Years later, Amina stood in front of a packed university auditorium. She was no longer that barefoot child from the dusty streets of Ouagadougou. She was a young woman now, educated, poised, strong. The room fell silent as she stepped up to the microphone. She took a deep breath, smiled gently, and said, "President Ibrahim Traoré did not save me that day." The crowd stirred. Surprised by her words, he saw me. And that made all the difference. Because when someone sees you, really sees you, you learn to see yourself. When someone tells you that you matter, it gives you the strength to carry your own flag. Even when it feels too heavy, the hall erupted in applause. And just like that day years ago, there was not a dry eye in the room. As for Ibrahim Traoré, he continued to lead. Not perfectly, but authentically. He made mistakes, as all leaders do, but he never lost sight of that moment in the crowd. The small, trembling hands holding a flag too big for her to carry alone. He fought against corruption, even when it cost him friends. He challenged foreign powers who tried to dictate his nation's fate, and he kept visiting villages, often unannounced, to remind the people that their leader was not above them. But, among them, those who had once doubted him began to see what true leadership looked like. It was not in golden palaces or long speeches. It was in dusty streets, in shared burdens, in the courage to kneel. Years later, people would tell the story of the little girl and the president to their children. It became folklore, a tale of unity, of compassion, of a flag that became light when two hearts decided to carry it together. And every time the flag of Burkina Faso fluttered against the sky, they remembered her words. When we carry it together, it's not so heavy. Leadership is not about power. It's about presence. It's about seeing those the world has forgotten and reminding them that they are not invisible. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can awaken an entire nation. And when a leader chooses to carry the weight with the people, even a broken flag can become a symbol of light. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that compassion is the truest form of strength, then carry this message forward. Share this story with someone who feels unseen. Comment below. What does this story mean to you? Subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and real leadership. Because hope is a flag we all must carry. And when we lift it together, it will never be too heavy.